Welcome, everyone, to episode 25 of the Argument Clinic. My name is Martin, and I'm joined by my lovely podcast host, Lawrence. How are you doing, Lawrence?
I'm doing not bad at all.
Not bad at all. Does that mean you are doing not and then bad at all? Or does that mean you are doing not bad at all?
The former.
The former, so like the first one.
Sure.
Okay. So, this, if you haven't listened before, The Argument Clinic is a podcast about Lincoln Douglas debate, fundamentals. Whether you're a grizzled veteran of the tournament scene, someone who has just going to their very first tournament, although that would seem like an odd thing to do in April, or you just like to listen to our chuckly voices, having a chuckle, good, fun time, this is the podcast for you. So where in the world have Martin and Lawrence been? So I went to the Woodward tournament where we recorded that fabulous live episode with mysterious guests Jacob Nails and maybe somebody else. And obviously I got to hang out with Lawrence, and that was so fun. And then I went to like a local tournament, and we qualified some kids to CFL Nationals. And yeah, that's it. So Lawrence, have you been doing anything in the interim? Have you been slaving away, judging or something, updating your massive spreadsheet?
I have not. So after we departed ways at the Woodward tournament, I was to fly back to Oklahoma, but Delta overbooked my flight and was unable to get me on a flight. And
You told me this, yes.
yeah, so they, instead of, like shoving me in a luggage compartment, decided to pay me $1,000 in Amazon gift cards, which I have used to purchase a Nintendo Switch that I've been playing the last couple of days.
Wow,
and it has been awesome. I know, it's great.
Why didn't you use it to buy your 12th computer?
Well, I am actually
diminishing returns.
I am about to build a desktop, so I'm saving a little bit of money for that.
This is so funny. Every time I make fun of you for having too many computers, you just get another one.
It's exciting.
Oh, that's perfect. Oh my god. Anyway, so you got a bunch of money in Amazon gift card. I hope all your professors are listening to this. Okay. So you have been playing your new Nintendo Switch. Have you bought all of the old Harry Potter games for it yet?
I have not. I've bought Legend of Zelda, Mario Odyssey, 3 Jackboxes now, actually, and yeah, that's it.
Lawrence needs to buy Mario Kart so we can play Mario Kart epically at tournaments. That would be so fun. Okay, so before we get into the main subject of our podcast, I wanted to give a shout out to Victory Briefs, and by that I mean I'll tell Lawrence to give a shout out to Victory Briefs. I like Victory Briefs too, but Lawrence has written up the thing that he wants to deploy.
Well, I wrote this like 3 episodes ago, and I've just been saying it each time. So thanks to Victory Briefs for sponsoring. Oh, yeah. Thanks to Victory Briefs for sponsoring the podcast by providing the equipment and hosting support. Victory Briefs is a summer debate institute that is sure to improve your debate skills. Learn more about this camp this summer and their brief products at vbidebate.com, and check out our LD and PF staff announcements on Facebook, and stay tuned for more articles and announcements about stuff related to camp. We did post an epic April Fool's joke that ended up fooling a decent amount of people, which was pretty fun.
Yeah, it was funny because someone from another debate camp was like, "Wow, you all totally ripped off this other debate camp." And the thing is, I'm sure that other debate camp did the thing, but I'm also positive that you all had no idea that
we had no idea. Plus, this joke has been circulating since like 2015 or 14 at camp.
Yeah, dude,
we came up with it a long time ago.
Yeah, dude, yeah. I heard it like back in the day. So someone was like, "Wow, totally copying this other camp," and I really wanted to comment, being like, "I'm pretty sure that like they just didn't know that."
We had no clue, but it was still fun either way. Like we enjoyed the joke.
Special shout out to Andrew Dolberg, who I believe used to, if not still, runs part of that camp that we were sort of mentioning. Special shout out to him because he is running for, I believe, Florida State House Representative. So whenever you get the opportunity to vote for smart debate people, you get the opportunity to do that. You should definitely go out and do that. So everyone go out and support Andrew Dolberg. Not that many of you are of voting age or in that precise area. But if you are for some reason, remember to vote for Andrew Dolberg, however it is that you would do that. Okay, so on to the main thing. So first of all, our podcast is going to have two parts. The first part is a scholarship part where we will talk about advantages and disadvantages and kind of how they work. And really what we're going to do there is we're going to discuss how arguments work in like consequentialist debates. And then we will kind of break down those components and then use those to eventually go over what is an advantage and what is a disadvantage, not in a highly technical sense, but in a kind of just top-down sense. And then, bottom-up sense. And then the second part of our podcast is, instead of having an end segment, I have interviewed, I and Lawrence had a lovely interview with two members of my extended family, and who happened to be in town, and Lawrence's eardrums get totally destroyed by that. But so that is an interview that happened actually tonight, and we will attach it to the end of this podcast. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the section at the beginning, which is like more of the content stuff, and then we have a very fun debate interview lined up with these two awesome people. Okay, so Lawrence, do you have anything to say before we start? Do you have any recommendations for what food people should eat at Taco Bell, for example? That would be an example of a thing that you could enlighten the audience about.
I always go for the Cravings deal.
The Cravings deal, the $5 boxes.
I think they bumped it up to $6.
Good to pass up.
Yeah, they bumped it up to $6.
Really gouging. I personally go for the double-decker tacos, fresco style. Anyway, so when we return, we'll get into our substantive discussion of advantage and disadvantages. Welcome to the body segment of this podcast. We'll talk about advantages and disadvantages. Really, what we're going to talk about is taking an argument that is offense and explaining how that works. So, by way of refresher, first thing I'm going to do is we're going to talk about offense. We're going to talk about defense, which is going to be a review of some of the things that we talked about before. And then Lawrence is going to shepherd us into discussions of how that kind of applies. How does offense actually work? And then we're going to break down those concepts, kind of make it so that we understand what it is, and then use those to talk about advantages and disadvantages. So offense is a reason to vote for you and not for your opponent. And defense is a reason to not vote against you. So Lawrence, can you just talk about kind of just really quick, given that we had a whole podcast on it, the kind of functional differences between these two things?
Yeah, so again, had a whole podcast with Zoe Ewing. I think one of our best episodes, if I do say so myself.
It was really good.
I think the best way to identify something as offense is something changes, right? So if something changes, that is probably offense for one side or the other. So if you make the world better, that's probably offense for you. And if the AF makes the world worse, then that's probably offense for the neg. And defense is generally arguing against change, which is like the AF does not make the world better, the neg does not make the world better, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so today we're going to talk about offensive arguments, not defensive arguments.
Well, a little bit at the end, but mostly offensive.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to talk about how an offensive argument works, and then we are going to obviously tell you how to answer those arguments, and in doing so, obviously, defense comes into play. Okay, now I'm going to hand the reins over to Lawrence, who's going to lead us through this area, and of course, I will jump in.
Alrighty, so what we're going to do is further break down what makes something offensive. So we've said that there is some change, and so what we're going to do is use a sample resolution and make arguments about the sample resolution and identify those parts, and then use that to see how we can identify if something is offense or defense. So our sample resolution is resolved. Insert person names here, so like Martin should go to Burger King, right? And most likely the AF will say something like, go to Burger King, it's good. And the neg needs to say something against it. And they need to make an offensive argument. So Martin, what is like an example of a reason for why going to Burger King would be bad? So offense for the neg.
Going to Burger King is too expensive. It costs too much.
It's good. It's too expensive. Okay. So probably not the fast food restaurant that is like most prone to the charge of expensiveness. But how about another example? Something that like might be specific to why I picked Burger King over like McDonald's or something like that.
I mean, I don't know, like just like if you go to Burger King, there is a chance that you will acquire chicken nugget fries, and any risk of getting chicken nugget fries is just the worst possible impact because they are really bad for you and taste
Okay.
bad.
How about let's not do that. I think the chicken nugget fries are good. If anyone's ever had them, please email the Argument Clinic podcast.
I was so excited, and they're so bad. But,
Yeah.
but if you want, but if you all agree with either of us, please email the Argument Clinic
Oh,
podcast.
I've never had them. I'm just saying if you've had them, please let me know what it's like, because
Yeah, it's so bad.
tell me where to spend my money. Okay, so I think the reason I picked Burger King over McDonald's is like I'm of the opinion that it's particularly bad tasting. Like it doesn't really taste that good. And I think this argument is offense because it is not just like defensive in the sense that it's not a reason to vote against you, but it is offense. It's a reason to vote against the affirmative, to vote to not go to Burger King, and it is a change from the status quo because it will be the introduction of something bad tasting into your body. And what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how we determine it's a change and the steps of an argument that we need to make in order to like make this an offensive argument. All right. So I'm not exactly sure how I want to do this. So I'll just jump in and go for it. So I think each argument on face has three components, and I'll just like walk over each of the parts with Martin as we go through them. So the first part is we need to describe what we're changing from. So there needs to be a point of comparison in order to figure out where the change occurs, because change does not occur in a vacuum. It has to occur in relation to something. And that would generally be called the status quo, the way it currently is now. So what we need to figure out is what it is now so we can determine what we're changing from. So as part of this bad tasting argument, Martin, what would be the status quo?
Not tasting anything now that is negative or positive.
Yeah, so most likely the reason we're debating about this topic is probably because someone wants to put food in their body. And so what we're figuring out is right now, there is no bad tasting food. If we don't establish this, I think it's really difficult to make a comparison. As I said, changes don't occur in a vacuum. So it's important that we need to say, this is how it is now. I think all of the important reasons for why this concept matters will become more apparent as we discuss it in the later parts about how to respond to this and some of the components of this. But I think that's basically all we need for this part, right? Just this is the way it is now, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Alrighty. So now that we've described what we're changing from, we need to describe the change from that. And so I guess in this example, it would just be going to Burger King puts bad tasting food in your body, right? That is a change from what it is now, which is no bad food in your body. And then the final part, and this is the part that really makes an argument offensive, is why that change is bad. So I don't like bad tasting food. I would assume most people don't like either. And that is the reason for why the change from what we've described earlier has an impact or has a reason for like why that should be a reason to not do the resolution, for why we shouldn't do the affirmative. And really, I think those are in the most simplistic forms, the three most basic parts of an argument. Yeah. Anything to add before we jump into the terminology and explaining it a little bit more in depth? That seems to be like the basics, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a couple of things. One thing is that what I want you to realize, listeners, is so pretty much all of you, in fact, I would say the vast majority of you, are debaters. You've obviously made arguments before. Now, this is a podcast on advantages and disadvantages. So you may be asking yourself, what about anything that we just said was an advantage or a disadvantage? You're just telling me things I already know about an argument. And what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to say, yes, these are all arguments that you make. Every argument that you make in a consequentialist level debate, aka if you're having a debate about under utilitarianism or a debate under, a framework of oppression is bad or something that cares about end results. Every argument that you've made up to this point in that area has these features, even if you haven't realized it yet. So what we're trying to do is trying to get you to think about some of the arguments that you've made. And every one of these arguments, every negative argument could be put in this form that Lawrence said. So here's a way to put it that is not specific to, let's say, the negative. So in general, you have a kind of baseline that is before you do the resolution. And then doing the affirmative will change that baseline in some way. Now, depending on whether you're affirmative and negative, like when you're affirmative, you will say that that we improve from the baseline. And when you are neg, you will say we decline from the baseline. Should we do the affirmative? And then the last part of it is just like, why should we care at all about that thing? And that will be a very familiar word that we have used many times. But what I really want you to do, I think the key project for you to do is think about every contention argument you've made in a utilitarian debate. You will find throughout the course of this podcast that you should be that you're listening to, that every argument that you've made, even if you haven't realized it, has had all of these components. And what we're going to do is try and get you to be able to identify these components as separate items so that you know how to respond to them differently. Did that make sense as a kind of like overall overview? Obviously, nothing that Lawrence said was wrong, but so you so does that make sense as kind of Lawrence? Does that make sense as kind of like the overall way of thinking about this stuff?
Yes, and all of those individual components will, I think, be more explained when we get to the parts about terminology and responding to these arguments. So, right. So that is, I think, I think right now we should give another example, but this time for the affirmative and utilize the same sort of model of 3 parts of an argument that we've described, and just jump into that, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, cool. So let's give a popular affirmative argument on the resolution of Martin should go to Burger King. I would assume that the reason for why Martin would want to go to Burger King is because he is hungry. And so this also is a 3-part argument, and we should take care to identify all 3 of those parts. So the first...
So sorry to cut you off, Lawrence. What I'm going to do is, I think this will make this kind of easier for our listeners. I'm going to give you a kind of normal, plain language argument, okay? One that you might hear in any debate event. And Lawrence, what I'd like you to do is kind of according to that, pick apart that thing, okay? So let's say that I said the following thing. I said, I should go to Burger King. It will help sate my hunger that, pains me so, which is a really, old English way to put it, right? So it'll help sate my hunger, that hurts. So how would you take that kind of normal argument? I said plain language when I ended up putting it in British English, which really did not help. But so if you had to take that argument and translate it into the kind of components that we talked about, or I'd say like, it helps me get less hungry. Like if I said like it decreases my hunger, how would you kind of take that argument and separate it into its components?
Right. So that is actually probably the better way to do it. So again, there are 3 parts, which is first, we need to identify how it is now, the status quo. So that way we can identify the baseline from which we're changing. Second is we need to identify what the change is. And third, in this case, we need to identify why that change matters, or in this case is good, since we're trying to make an argument for the affirmative here. So the first part is what it is right now. And right now, Martin is pretty hungry. Martin is starving. Martin is like, his stomach is growling even more than usual. It is the hunger is just overwhelming, unbearable. It is there. So that is the baseline from which we are comparing. The next part is the change away from the baseline, and that would be Burger King solves hunger, which is putting what are the burgers at Burger King called? Like
Whoppers.
Whoppers, yeah, those silly things. Eating a Whopper will cure Martin of his hunger. And then the third and final part is why that change matters, or in this case, is good. And that change is that it's good because if Martin were to continue being hungry, he would be sad and maybe die. And so this is the same way that we can apply it for both negative and affirmative arguments. All three of them are composed of here is a baseline, here is a change, and here is why that change matters. So I think now that we have that in mind, it's worth breaking down the terminology before moving into some more detailed parts of these types of arguments. So we've identified that there are three components to an argument that makes it offensive. And there have three separate parts, and those parts have individual names. So let's just use the most recent example that we had, the hunger example. So we have this description of the status quo, which is Martin is hungry now. In debate jargon, Martin, what would this be called?
Unicues?
UQs. That is probably what I typed into the document, but it is uniqueness. And I think a lot of people have heard this word before in debate where they're just like, that's non-unique. This is like, there's no uniqueness for this or something like that. And people have thrown it around. I've heard it a lot, even in Oklahoma debate. But really, at its baseline, the term uniqueness just means a description of the status quo, a description of how things are currently going. Because remember, in order for a change to matter, it needs to be a change from the baseline, from what is happening right now. Like change does not occur in a vacuum. And so it's really important to establish uniqueness and to make sure that the term uniqueness only is used in this context as a description of the status quo. Okay. So when people are throwing around the word uniqueness, they're usually doing it wrong. And we'll explain some of the other terms.
I actually think that they are normally doing it, although in a different way, in exactly the same sense that we use the term.
Ooh, really interesting. So I've heard.
I guess here's the question: when people say that an argument is non-unique, to what, Lawrence?
Usually, I've heard it in the context of it's non-unique. The affirmative does not solve.
So, if an argument is non-unique, not unique to what, you think?
I have no idea what most people are using it in the context of. I mean,
when people say that something is non-unique, what they usually say is that this is a problem that is not unique to my side of the resolution. So for example, you would say, if I was like, if I talked about why, if I read a piece of evidence on the universal basic income topic that said welfare was good. One of the arguments that people would make would say that's non-unique because there's welfare in my world too.
Sure, and that might be a correct way of doing it, and we'll talk more about that on the responses part. But generally, the way that I've heard it in local debate is just like you don't solve, like it's non-unique, you don't solve.
Yeah, I mean, like because there is a connection kind of between those two things. I think
there's a connection to impact uniqueness.
I think the no. Well, so really, it's best to think about the term "it's non-unique" as the impact to the fact that they don't solve, which is kind of a weird way of putting it for the listeners. But like, basically, what they're saying is, you've said that there's this problem, however, you don't solve it, which means that it's non-unique because the problem will either happen or not happen, regardless of who you vote for.
So there is some truth to that. Yeah, there is some truth to that, but I think the sort of conflation of those is still, I think, harmful because most people are referring to top-level uniqueness when they're really meaning to make an impact uniqueness claim, and that's like
so we will certainly not talk about that. Mostly. But the thing that I want you to understand, folks at home, is if you have ever made a non-unique argument in debate, you are making a uniqueness argument. It's the same word. It means the same kinds of things. But it's important to recognize, as Lawrence said, that you use it in the right way because it actually does have a technical meaning. What you're saying for uniqueness is that there is this problem that exists or doesn't exist. How are the current state of things? And you use uniqueness to distinguish yourself from your opponent. Are you unique from them, etc. Okay, so now that we know uniqueness, I would say that uniqueness, although So it may seem that we're spending an inordinate amount of time talking about this random concept called uniqueness, but it actually is, I think, a very important conceptual achievement that you all will get when you understand uniqueness and its place in arguments. Okay, so what is the next part of an offensive argument?
So the next part is the change from the status quo, or the change from the here and now, and that is what we would call a link, right? A change or something that some side does, either the affirmative or the negative, that causes them to change the status quo, and we call that the link argument. So going to Burger King.
When you're affirmative, the solvency argument, right?
Yes, exactly. So, and this will, I think, get fleshed out a little bit more in a second because we're going to talk about the differences between the AF and the neg. But you're right. So on the negative, we typically call it a link. And on the affirmative, we typically call it solvency, or the ability to do something about something and solve the problem that has been presented. But,
and yeah. I mean, like, these are all words that you all have heard before and know what they mean. If you say, like, what is the link between your argument and the resolution? Like, that's just what this word means. And when you say, how do you solve? What is your solvency? Like, that word is the exact same word that we're using here. Look, what we're saying is super simple. Whatever you've made an argument in debate, usually people mix the uniqueness and the solvency link components together. They'll say a UBI would help income inequality, right? Really, what you mean is currently there is income inequality. If we implement UBI, we will reduce that income inequality, and therefore there will be less income inequality than there was. Every argument you just identify, you say, you look at the current state of things, and then you say how the resolution changes that. And every single affirmative argument or a negative argument you've ever made fits into that bucket. Okay, and what is the last part? It should be a very familiar word for all of you.
So I accidentally used it earlier, but the reason for why the change is either good or bad.
It's hard
or
not to use it, I mean, it's just
it's even a common word in like non-debate context. I hear it like on podcasts and stuff. So the reason for why that change matters is the impact, or like the ultimate reason for why something is good or bad. And I really think that is there much to say on that, really?
No. I think there's only one important thing to mention. So we talked about uniqueness and link and kind of the way that those are intimately connected. It's like, how are things right now? And then how does the affirmative change that? Either in a good way or a bad way. So now what it's important to realize is you then have something that's called the impact. And the impact, but the thing that makes advantages and disadvantages really clever, if you think about it this way, is you can keep adding impact as much as you want.
Oh, it's fun.
And so here's an example on a real resolution. So let's say I said the United States should implement a universal basic income. So one thing that I could say is the United States implementing a universal, like, currently the United States economy is doing fine. However, spending a bunch of money will hurt the economy, and that will cause the economy to collapse. So you could obviously those are like a bunch of separate arguments, but let's say you stopped there. So you said, okay, I have proven that the economy is doing fine now. However, the affirmative will certainly make things worse, and then that will result in all these bad economic harms. So technically, the affirmative, as the negative, you are totally allowed to keep adding impact until you are satisfied. So you don't have to stop at economic collapse. You could say, economic collapse, why is that bad? Well, that's bad because it causes terrorism. Why is terrorism bad? Well, terrorism is bad because it causes global warming. Global warming is bad because it causes an increase in diseases. That causes trade wars between different countries. That causes nuclear weapons development in some places. That makes wars more likely. Wars attract aliens from outer space. Now you're really entering interstellar territory here. Fun fact,
I once judged a debate on I adjudicated a debate on the merits of the affirmative making an argument about space, about going up into space with NASA or something, and then the negative arguing that that was not topical because the resolution says international, but that would be interstellar.
Good argument.
Isn't that hilarious? Shout out to Matthew Pregerson, who introduced that lovely argument at the Novice State Championship. And why do I still remember that? Okay. So yeah, that was awesome. Okay. So yeah, everything between the link and the impact is what's called an internal link for obvious reasons. It's just basically you take your link argument or your solvency argument and you take your impact argument, and everything in between that you just call an internal link. From your perspective, you can just keep adding stuff. Now, adding stuff is kind of usually like not the best idea, especially when you already have like a pretty good impact. Like there's no reason if you say that your opponent will cause economic collapse to just all of a sudden argue that will cause 5 other things and therefore kill us. Instead, you should just stick with that. However, sometimes you may need to add internal links to your disad or your advantage just to kind of increase the power of your impact. So, for example, let's say I had an argument about war. Let's say Lawrence, that I said that I should go to Burger King because it helps reduce war. Now you have this Burger King taste argument. Let's see how many internal links you can add to that will get you to a war impact as well, such that you don't lose the weighing debate.
Okay, so I'm neg, right?
You are neg. You've said that Burger King is not tasty.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to. Should I go for like the highest possible number or just like the lowest possible number of internal links here?
Go for like 5 internal links.
Okay. So
that's probably like the second lowest that you could get there. Will it still making sense? I haven't crunched the numbers.
Are you related to anyone in the military?
No.
Dang it. That would make my life a lot easier.
1 internal link.
But yeah, I honestly don't know how I could get there. Let's see. Okay, so bad tasting food makes Martin sad. Crying Martin becomes sad and goes on a rampage, and that causes
a rampage.
I imagine Martin on a rampage, and that and then insert generic impact card about how terrorism invites retaliation.
Terrorism invites retaliation. Like,
to be fair, as unwarranted as that internal story is,
the United States government and Russia is going to be like, ooh.
You just attack a Burger King in just pure spite and vengeance for how bad tasting the burger you ate was, and it'll be interpreted as
That'll cause Rick and Morty to get canceled. That will cause Bernie to lose the next election.
Oh gosh! Oh no! Okay.
Oh, that would probably be a true fact. I don't know if Bernie could win the next election if Rick and Morty's canceled.
Even if the man ran.
What will they do? Okay. No politics on the podcast, but that is a very funny hypothetical. Okay. So Lawrence did a medium job, but yes. Okay. So the point is, sometimes you will need to get creative to kind of extend your scenarios such that you get to an argument that is appropriate. Don't do it such that your opponent can call out your arguments for being obviously stupid, because that will certainly not help your cause. Okay. So okay, take us away, Lawrence.
Okay, so before I guess we move on to anything else, I really want to emphasize there is a reason for why we separate these 3 things into 3 separate components instead of just keeping them all meshed together as one. And because in most debates, you'll never in a public debate, you'll never need to know the terms uniqueness, link, solvency, impact, any internal link, anything like that. But I think the main reason for why we want to understand these separate components is because, one, it's going to make it a lot easier to respond to them. And we're going to get into that here in a second. But I think it's also really important so you know where the weaknesses of your argument are. So when they are responded to, you know exactly how to respond back to those responses and identify the weaknesses in your own argument. If you don't really know what the weakness of an argument is, because you don't know, for example, why your link is very weak, right? And someone attacks that, and you might not have an understanding of why that's really important. If someone takes out your link, that has a lot of implications, and you're going to have to deal with it slightly differently than if someone attacks your impact. And all of this, I think, will be made a lot more clear when we discuss the responses. But I think it's really important for both responding to and responding to responses mindset to like understand the differences between these three components of the argument, so you don't mix and match them, and you know exactly how to deal with them.
That is just so true. That is exactly why you all really need to know, because people will not differentiate them for you most of the time. In fact, most of the time they will just make an argument. They will just mash a bunch of arguments together, and it will be your job to kind of disentangle them. For example, if I said, Lawrence, Martin going to Burger King increases, satedness or whatever, just like increases fullness. So what would be the uniqueness and link arguments for that?
It's really hard to tell if that's the only thing that is said. I guess the link argument would just be like increases fullness, but what's the impact? And the uniqueness is a little bit questionable because I don't really know what it is when you're just saying it in that one sentence.
Well, no, like, I mean, you can definitely figure it out, right? It's just not explicitly stated. The thing is, most people word their
I guess is the assumption.
Right, yeah. Most people word their arguments in such a way. They will say the resolution increases X. But the phrase increases X has two different things built into it, right? So if you say something increases, you mean actually that you mean the following two things. You mean A, there is a current state of X. And then B, that the resolution results in more of that. Or like the resolution is like +5 units of X, let's say. And it's just important because those two components are answered differently. So the question of whether or not, so for example, UBI decreases poverty, okay? So that is obviously a common sense normal argument, but it really has a uniqueness and a link component. The uniqueness component would be, there is poverty that exists now. And then the solvency component would be UBI in general reduces poverty. Those two things are separate because if, for example, there was no poverty, even if a UBI in general would decrease poverty, it wouldn't make any sense. And let's say you want to make an argument. So I think actually maybe Lawrence, why don't we just get into like some of this stuff now, because this is where it gets really cool, right? So let's
just jump in.
So like let's say you are kind of affirmative. No one is kind of affirmative. You're definitely affirmative, right? And so your argument is UBI decreases poverty. But what you've done is you've separated into two arguments. You've said poverty is bad and getting worse. And we'll talk about in a minute why that's an affirmative argument versus a negative argument. So the affirmative would say poverty is bad and getting worse. And then you would say the way that you fix that is by implementing a UBI. And the reason is that a UBI would decrease poverty if implemented. Let's say your opponent says, actually a UBI would like have it some effect on poverty. Or like UBI would have no effect on reducing poverty whatsoever or something. Or it would say, yeah. So Lawrence, if you were affirmative, and I know you would do this, right? So what would you say if your opponent just said that? If your opponent just said UBI actually could help contribute to poverty?
So they just didn't answer the uniqueness, which is that poverty is getting worse now, and there's only really a chance that the affirmative is able to do something to solve or reduce or alleviate poverty.
Yeah, so see what it does to you when you separate out the arguments. So really, what you've done is you've made two arguments. You've made the argument that the status quo is currently infested with poverty. And then two, you've said that a UBI helps to reduce that infestation, right? But the point is, if your opponent just says UBI might increase poverty, they have not responded to the claim that there is still a massive infestation of poverty occurring now. If you can assign that to your opponent, that is pretty devastating, even if your opponent is kind of right about some of the UBI components of that. Okay, so why don't we talk about kind of the difference between what is an advantage, what is a disadvantage in terms of how they're set up.
All right.
I guess in order just a way of setting the tone. So in Lincoln Douglas debate, Lawrence, especially in consequentialist debates. So we talked in a while ago, in a lot of episodes ago, about the concept of an advocacy, or at least I think we did. I don't actually know if we did. But so when you are debating the resolution, what are the two things you are comparing when you have to decide who to vote for?
Well, the affirmative and the negative.
Right. And what does the affirmative represent? This should be an easy question.
The resolution, or at least an instance of the resolution.
So the affirmative obviously has to defend the resolution, so they will claim that we should do the resolution. Now, what are we comparing it to on the negative side? What is the negative typically stuck with?
The negative is typically just stuck with defending not the resolution, which is the status quo, or how it is currently.
Okay, so this is a huge important thing to realize. So what we've told you so far is that the status quo means what is happening right now. And it is important to note that in the vast majority of debates, the debate you're having is between the resolution and not doing the resolution, which really means nothing. So you do nothing versus doing the resolution. And the negative is the one that defends nothing. The negative will say, things should stay as they are now. It would be bad to do the resolution. And then the affirmative obviously says, things should not stay as they are now. It is important for us to do the resolution, because otherwise things will be bad. So with that kind of terminology, it is really, really important that when you are debating at any point a consequentialist argument, you should consider what side of the resolution you are on, and therefore what you are trying to do. So as the affirmative, you must argue that the resolution is good, and the negative must argue that the resolution is bad. But compared to what? The affirmative is not just resolution good in a vacuum, and negative isn't resolution bad in a vacuum. The affirmative is resolution is good relative to doing nothing, and the negative argues resolution is bad relative to doing nothing. So it is just really, really important that when you all are listening to the rest of this podcast and just thinking about the way that arguments work, you need to think that is the comparison that you're having between the status quo and the resolution. Don't just think about the resolution. Think status quo versus the resolution.
I think that was really good and important. And so I think with that, we can just jump into what's the difference between the aff and the neg.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
All right, cool. So really all three of the components are still there, but there's just a few differences with them. So let's just start with the uniqueness or description of the status quo. You'll notice that in the earlier examples about the Burger King resolution, the negative made the argument that uniqueness, there is no bad tasting thing now. And the affirmative made the uniqueness argument that there is hunger now. And you'll notice that they're sort of flip-flopped, right? The negative has made the uniqueness argument that things are fine and dandy now, and the affirmative has made the uniqueness argument that things are not very fine and dandy now. And so when you're making uniqueness arguments, the aff is, well, hopefully they do that, and if they're smart, because the affirmative needs to argue that things are not great now so they can get better. And the negative generally wants to argue that things are good now and they're going to get worse, right? Because worse can only occur in a vacuum relative to something, and better can only occur in a vacuum. It can't occur in a vacuum. It can only occur relative to something. So the affirmative needs to argue that it's bad now so it can get better, and the negative needs to argue that it's good now so it can get worse.
Right. So that's true. And I think there's maybe an even easier way to put this. So when you are affirmative, okay. So Lawrence, what did we just talk about? The affirmative normally defends what?
The resolution.
And the negative normally defends what?
Nothing.
So and like of course specifically the status quo. So when you were affirmative, you are comparing the resolution to the status quo, right? So in your uniqueness argument, which by definition, the word uniqueness means a description of the status quo, why would you say that that's bad?
Well, because that would just be what the neg defends, and the neg is bad, so don't
Yeah,
vote neg.
you're literally comparing the resolution to the neg, and where the neg means the status quo. So if you're affirmative, you would say status quo bad because that's literally your opponent. Right? I mean, like you would say, and all those other things that you said were also true. In order to argue that we should do things, you have to argue that things need improving. And needs improvement requires there be something bad now for you to fix. Of course.
Yep.
So so it's really important when you're affirmative, you say things are bad now. And what's kind of the next component? Again, we call it solvency.
Right. So this is the difference between the next part is the AF is just going to call this solvency. The neg is going to call this the link. But both of them are functionally the same thing. It's like, how does the AF change the status quo, right? So the AF is going to say it solves something that is bad, which was described in the uniqueness section. And the neg is going to say it changes the status quo, but obviously for the worse. And that's going to be their link argument.
Mm-hmm. One way of thinking about this, now I've taught this subject many times, but in the subject is way easier with a physical board. But basically, your argument needs to be that if nothing happens, things will go to the dogs, and therefore we need the targeted intervention of the affirmative. So, it's so you can argue either the things are super bad now, or the things will get worse. But usually you should argue both. You should argue if nothing happens, things will take a turn for the worse. And the resolution is the perfect band-aid to fix that problem. Okay, and the impact stuff is very similar, and we're definitely going to focus on that part a lot less. The impact part is just why does it matter? Now, typically when people read advantages and disadvantages, the impact part of it is the same from the advantage to the disadvantage, which means whether you're F or neg shouldn't change this at all. And the only really other relevant part is that it is some people add a lot of impacts to their stuff just to increase the quantity of link arguments. Okay, so you want to talk about neg stuff? Pop quiz. When you were the neg, you were saying that the status quo is what?
Fine and dandy.
Why? Why would you say that?
Because that establishes a baseline by which we can measure that the AF makes it worse.
Okay, that's
and because yeah, this is a complicated version. Whatever. The status quo is the neg. It's good.
Yeah. Yeah, you're the neg. That's you, dude. You can't say the status quo is bad. People do this all the time. Like, people do this all the time, Lawrence. People that do tech debate do this. They're just like, they tag their card as like things are on the brink, and then you read their card and it's just like things are super bad now.
Yep, that's a fair point.
By the way, I'm sorry, this is just like a really funny thing. I want to talk about just really quickly about this one disadvantage that I saw at Woodward because I think it's so funny. I'm not gonna call out who it was, but I looked at a disadvantage, and the uniqueness card of the disadvantage was old, right? It was from like the card was about 2016 or something, and it was read at the Woodward tournament this year. And then in the same disad, this person's impact card was from 2018 and made the opposite uniqueness argument.
Ooh, rough. Was this
So-
the Cartels DA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so funny. We had this line prepared if our opponents ever read it that was going to be like, we will concede your impact card, which takes out the uniqueness of your disad. And it was really funny because it also post-dated the uniqueness card.
By a lot.
By a lot.
Jacob Nails and I had a long discussion about why the Cartels DA was bad at this tournament.
Oh, it was very funny that we had an independent discussion about that, or rather, I had it at 3:30 a.m. prepping my kid for a debate. Okay,
unnecessary.
So I will send you that doc. It is fire. Okay, so what were we even talking about before I just completely derailed us? Oh yeah. So when you're neg, you say that the status quo is good because that's you, dude. Like you're saying, obviously, yeah, you need a baseline through which to determine your arguments, which means that. So I think that this really comes into play in two really important ways. So number one, when you are negative, people these days when they read disads, a lot of the time they say, "quote we're quote on the brink," end quote, and then they just read a card that things are getting worse. You can't do that. The phrase on the brink, you need to read a card that you are not going to pass the brink. Otherwise, who cares?
Fair point.
So here's why that argument, as just a normal negative argument, doesn't make sense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to instead of talking about it in complicated disad words, I'm just going to talk about like a normal argument. So let's say my argument is that that the economy is doing really bad, and then that the affirmative will result in an economic, like the economy is spiraling downward. And then I say that the affirmative will result in harms to the economy. And then I say that if the economy does really bad, bad things will happen. What's the problem with that, Lawrence?
Well, the economy's getting bad anyways. Like, who cares what the F does?
Yeah, so it's non-unique, right? The point is,
Right.
The economy doing bad is non-unique. Because sure, the affirmative might cause the economy to do bad, right? AKA, if you're evaluating the resolution versus the status quo, you know that the resolution part of it is bad, but your part of the resolution is also bad because you read a card that it was bad, right? So it's like you have read a card against yourself. You have read a card that you are indistinguishable from your opponent. Like that is not where you want to be. So,
oh, really? Dang.
Yeah. So it's really important for you to differentiate yourself from your opponent. And the way that you do that is by saying that things are good, not saying that things are bad. The other thing that I think it's really important to recognize is that when you are negative and answering the affirmative case, it's really important that you give kind of uniqueness arguments for your own kinds of things. And basically what I mean by this is it's really important, even if you don't have cards, it's really important that you do not accept your opponent's pessimism about the way that the world currently looks. So for example, if you are debating against an affirmative on the topic of income inequality, okay, let's say you're having a UBI debate and your opponent is like, I decrease income inequality. So keep in mind that it is a very strong argument, regardless of whether your opponent has made this argument in a complete way. It is a very strong argument to argue that income inequality is getting better in America. And sorry, I want to preface this by saying that may be completely false. Obviously, false arguments aren't strategic because they're wrong, and therefore it is harder to win them. But the point is, if you could make the argument that income inequality is getting better in America, that would be a super strong point because it would prove that your world, income inequality improves, which means that the fundamental premise of your opponent's argument can't be true because they're saying UBI helps decrease income inequality. And you've said, yes, but that's non-unique because so does doing nothing. So having uniqueness kinds of arguments, really just recognizing that it's a good idea to make those arguments is super useful. You can say, your opponent, for example, can say, there's, the affirmative, the UBI helps to solve crime. This is, I think, a very easy example. So let's say they say a UBI, fails crime because people would like steal stuff to make ends meet, but a UBI prevents that. This is the perfect example of an argument where the negative can just really win on uniqueness. They'll just say crime is lowering now. That's the status quo, which means that in both the affirmative and negative world, crime declines, which means that crime declining is not unique to your side. Okay, Lawrence, did I convince you?
Well, I didn't need any convincing, but I assume if I were some neutral observer that had no opinion, I would be convinced now.
Okay, now I want to kind of just switch over to the affirmative for a sec. So when you're affirmative and the negative reads a bunch of cards about how the resolution might do some bad things, how can you use uniqueness arguments as important tools? We've already like talked about that stuff a little bit. But let's say your opponent concedes all of your cards that things are super bad now. How does that help you?
Well, it means two things. It means one, the neg is bad, and two is it means that there's only really a chance that the AF can make things better. So like maybe if income inequality is already super bad and the negative has conceded this, and the neg is like the AF might make income inequality a little bit worse. Well, like I think in most instances, most people would take the gamble and try to make things better because honestly, the negative has already conceded that both the AF and the neg are pretty awful, and only the AF has a chance of making it any better.
Yeah, definitely. It's really important that you say if your opponent is like, here's all these problems with the UBI, you can also just be like, dude, you dropped all my cards that your world sucks. Your world is terrible. Income inequality is increasing, crime is increasing, all this stuff. Like maybe it could be that a UBI wouldn't fix those problems, but I mean, geez, you've conceded that your world has a ton of all these random problems. So I'm pretty sure that if I win that your world has all the problems, my world doesn't have to be that much better for me to win, right? Right, Lawrence?
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
Even marginally better would do it.
And that's the thing. Keep in mind that once you become aware of the way that these arguments works, it just becomes so much easier to win these arguments. Because really, if you can say things are bad now, the affirmative fixes those things. If your opponent only responds to whether or not the affirmative fixes them, they basically just dropped a bunch of cards that say their world is bad. Like, isn't that awesome? That would be like
nice.
That would be like if you're neg and you just like read 5 case turns and your opponent dropped them all. Like that would be awesome. Right? It's like, but that's basically what happens. If you read a bunch of cards that things are super bad now and your opponent doesn't answer them, they have dropped that they are bad. Your chances of winning that round skyrocket because you get to say, look at all these bad things my opponent has conceded that they caused by doing nothing. And, maybe I'm not the ultimate way to fix all those things, but geez, you don't have to be that much better in order to be better than nothing. And if nothing is a horrible place to be, you should try and do something. So these are important tools for both the affirmative and the negative. And I think they will definitely help a lot. Now we're going to use the terminology that we talked about at the beginning of the video. So this episode is titled...
Ooh, video. Interesting.
We don't have video. Sorry, guys. Lawrence's face is too handsome. It would break the internet. So what was I saying? I was too busy telling that outrageous lie. I forgot what I was going to say.
Back to the terminology at the beginning of this episode.
Okay. So Lawrence, an advantage is what?
A reason to do the AF.
Yes.
Or the
And
resolution.
what are the parts of an advantage?
There is the uniqueness or description of why the status quo sucks. The solvency part, which is how the AF fixes the problems in the status quo, and the impact, which is what happens if we allow the status quo to continue, and the bad things that will happen as a result of that.
That compartmentalized thing, which is all on one important issue, is called an advantage. Woo. And Lawrence, what is a disadvantage?
It is a reason for why doing the affirmative or the resolution is a bad idea. It is composed of also 3 parts. There's uniqueness, which is that the status quo or the negative is doing fine and dandy, to use Jacob Niels' terms, the link is how the AF changes that, and generally for the worse. And the impact is why that change is really, really bad, and a reason to vote against the affirmative.
Okay, great. So,
So I think it's good time to sort of discuss in a more formalized manner the various ways to respond to advantages and disadvantages. And I think we'll mostly talk about this in the context of responding to a disadvantage, because if you remember the above segment, advantages and disadvantages are pretty similar. There's just like a few minor differences. So we've already discussed most of this. I'm just going to give this to you sort of quickly in a sort of list format and emphasize one thing that I think is particularly important. All right, so let's start with uniqueness, right? Let's use a simple argument about spending money. So if we are negative, making a spending disadvantage, the uniqueness claim would be we are not spending that much money now. Now, the affirmative has two ways to respond to this claim. They can make the claim that it's non-unique because we're either about to spend a bunch of money now, right? Or we've already spent a bunch of money. So like, say someone is like, spending disad, we have $10 now, you spend $5. And someone's like, non-unique, we have, like $0 now. Well, not really a big deal. And then the second response that you can make is that uniqueness overwhelms the link, which is that the uniqueness or the status quo is really, really, really good right now. And that protects us from the bad things that will happen. So in this context, it could be like the neg has made the argument that we have $10 now, you spend some of that, that's bad. The AF can just be like, we have $35 now, so spending $5 isn't really that big of a deal. And this is saying that the status quo is really, really good, so that even though the AF makes the status quo a little bit worse, it's not really that bad. The next part is the link argument, which in this context is how the AF changes the status quo, and that would be that the AF spends like $5. So there's a few ways we can respond to it. And the first is simply saying that there is no link, that you have misapplied an argument to the affirmative. And so like one potential way that the affirmative could say no link in the context of our Burger King example is like, I have a coupon. So don't really actually spend any money. There is not a change from the status quo, at least not in the way that the neg wants to describe it. So there is no change, nothing bad. The next argument, or number two, is link defense, which is that maybe the link or the change happens, but that change isn't really that bad. So the AF doesn't spend that much money. So instead of $5, it only costs like $1 or $2, because like Burger King is running some deal to get people to eat their awful Whoppers. That's what they're called, right? Whoppers.
shade.
I really don't like Burger King, except for their Hershey chocolate pie. I strongly endorse that, but you can also buy that at Walmart for much cheaper. Okay, so link defense. So the AF does not spend that much. The change from the status quo isn't that bad. The third one is the one that I think everyone has heard, but I don't think really fully understands, and we're going to jump in and talk about this for a little bit. And this third argument is the link turn, which is that the AF saves money, or that the AF does the opposite of what the negative is described happens. So the neg is like the AF spends money, the AF is like link turn, the AF saves money. So the link turn is actually generally considered offense for the affirmative, because it's like instead of doing a bad thing, you've now done a good thing. Instead of spending money, which is bad, you've saved money, which is good. And so on a lot of topics, like there'll be like the negative will be like on the UBI topic that it increases unemployment, and the negative will, or the affirmative will respond with link turn, I decrease unemployment. Or the negative will be like the AF violates rights, and the AF will be like the AF actually better protects rights and stuff like that. The thing that's really important here about the link versus the link turn is this concept called weighing, or something that we've discussed on a previous episode, I believe. And here's why. A link turn by itself is not offense until you prove that it outweighs the initial link. And that's like kind of complicated. So what do I mean by that? Say the argument is like the AF spends $5.
Sorry, I'm like, so the spirit of what you're saying is right, but the argument is obviously still offense in a technical sense.
Yeah. Okay, I guess it is. It's just like not important. Or
because I mean, what Lawrence will say in 5 seconds is just that, like, yes, so it's like you have offense, hooray, but you still need to like win the debate.
Yeah, okay, I agree. So that's probably a better way of putting it. Okay, so say like the neg is like you spend $5, and the AF responds with I save $1. Well, that doesn't really do anything for the AF, because if the negative is correct, that you still spent $5, and you're like, I saved $1. Well, the neg still wins because they still prove that you spent $4. And so they've won the initial link, and that outweighs your link turn, so they're still going to win. And in the context of a lot of debate arguments, I think it makes a lot more sense why you need to weigh the link versus the link turn. Say the neg is like, you hurt the economy, and the AF is like, I benefit the economy. And the neg is like, you hurt the economy because of unemployment, and the AF is like, I benefit the economy because I reduce turnover in jobs or something like that on the UBI topic. Well, which side wins? And it's not an easy question to answer unless the debaters do weighing of the link versus the link turn, where they really do a good job of comparing, like which side really helps the economy, which side really hurts the economy, and something like that. And they have to compare those two things against each other. I think this is really important in a lot of debates because like the argument that I described above is like more than one debate I've seen or heard on the UBI topic. And then it's just left up to the judge to like flip a coin and decide which one they decide is more important for the economy.
I think you all can see this in just like debates that you have all the time that you maybe are sad that judges do not incline your way on. So if you're like, a UBI is bad for the economy because it spends a bunch of money, and they're like UBI is good for the economy because it, reduces inflation or whatever. And then you both just stare at the judge. It's like, where the judge is me, I'm just sitting there being like, do you all plan at any point to tell me who I should vote for? I mean, like, but the thing is, when we were talking about weighing, like in that other section, we were talking about weighing in terms of like terminal impact, right? Where it's like, is the economy more important than terrorism, or is terrorism more important than the economy, or whatever, right? And this is obviously, Lawrence, less about that. And it's more about you have one impact, you have the same impact, which contributes to those impacts more. And it's important that you mentally realize, and I think you can use this kind of internal link impact stuff that we've really talked about for a while to recognize that when you say the affirmative spends a bunch of money and is bad for the economy, and then your opponent says a UBI, has a UBI like increases deficit spending, which is good or something. And you realize that your opponent didn't answer your argument, right? They just provided a counter argument in the other direction. And understanding that can also help you understand when your opponent has responded to an argument and when they haven't, and how to treat those situations, and why you need to kind of talk about the relative value of each of those situations in particular contexts.
I agree. That is good. Final thing about answering the link argument from the perspective of the affirmative is to argue that there is no link uniqueness. Now, this is a complicated term, but it's pretty simple, which is just saying that the change that the negative has described will happen, but some other way. It's very closely related to the non-unique argument above, but here's the difference between the two. The non-unique argument argues that it is happening now, right? It's a description of the status quo, that something like literally at this very moment is causing some bad things. It's bad right now. I guess if you're the AF responding, it'd be like, no. If you're non-unique, it is bad right now. That's what the AF would say. The no link uniqueness argument is that something sometime down the road will be very bad and will do the exact same thing that the negative is saying is bad. So in the context of spending, then the AF could respond with no link uniqueness, like something else is going to spend money down the road. So like if I don't spend it at Burger King, I guess I'm going to spend it at like Walmart or something like that. That money, that change will still happen in the future. And that's the difference between a non-unique and no link uniqueness. And taking this and making a no link uniqueness argument is really strategic in a lot of debates, because a lot of links are very, very small and are sort of inevitable anyways. So when people are like, you hurt the economy, and you're like, no link uniqueness, like the economy is going to get hurt from these other things that will happen in the future. Well, those all disprove the negatives argument. Okay, cool.
I think that the best example of like of a link uniqueness argument is like if you criticize the let's say you're affirmative and the negative criticizes you for something that would happen to literally anything if you did anything. So for example, let's say they said that a UBI is bad because signing the bill to pass a UBI would require one extra sheet of paper, which increases the risk of environmental destruction. So the point is, this argument has a lot of problems with it. Like, it's ludicrous. But B, like, it also has the obvious problem with it that if your criticism is that the affirmative is bad because it is a policy, policies are passed every day. If that's all you need to cause environmental devastation, the environmental devastation is going to be caused in 5 seconds. Maybe not from the time that we're recording this podcast, but it'll happen every single day.
Right.
So the point is, if the thing they're criticizing you for is a super common thing, this is the best way to check against very, very, very broad negative objections. So, for example, if the negatives argument is that taxes are bad, in a consequential sense, in a deontological sense, things are different. But if you say in a consequential sense, taxes are bad, it's like, yeah, people get taxed all the time, dude. You go to Taco Bell to buy a delicious double-decker taco, you get taxed. That's the thing.
And there's like 2 separate uniqueness arguments there, right? There's like the non-unique, which are taxes happening right now. Like you are literally being taxed as we speak. Tax season is approaching taxes are due in like what, a week and a half now. And there's like the link.
My taxes.
Oh gosh. And the link non-uniqueness argument, which is that in the future that same thing will happen, right? Like you will get taxed.
Yeah. So basically, the difference is that when people say uniqueness, what they really mean is what is the status of the first internal link of whatever your dissad is talking about. So if your dissad, for example, is about like spending money, like the affirmative spends money, spending money is the affirmative contributes, the affirmative spends money. You would have to win, and then like spending money contributes to inflation or whatever. Usually the uniqueness is about the inflation part of that. So you would say inflation is low now, but the affirmative spending contributes to inflation, etc. Whereas the link uniqueness is like, how often does the thing that you're saying? I feel like this is really complicated, but basically, like, it's much simpler than it sounds. Basically, if your argument is that the affirmative does a thing, and that thing, so the affirmative does X, and X leads to Y, and Y is bad. So the affirmative doing X leading to Y. When people say uniqueness, normally they mean, how are we doing with respect to Y? And then link uniqueness is all about X. But for most of these things, you don't really need to, most of these things don't necessarily come up all the time. Basically, what you should think about is, you should make a link uniqueness argument if the affirmative is, or if the negative is criticizing the affirmative for doing something that will definitely happen to anything. Like if their criticism is a criticism of anything, then that has no link uniqueness, because the things that they're talking about will just happen anyways, right? And if the affirmative, if their benefits are about things that would happen anyway, so let's say they're like, oh, passing the affirmative policy is good because it uses paper for some reason. It's like, yeah, okay, like the status quo uses paper all the time, like I solve. So, anyways, I feel like we've extracted almost the maximum morsels that we can get from this stuff. Do you have any last thoughts to add on this stuff?
The impact. I'm just gonna quickly, So responding to the impact, obviously,
real fast,
yeah. So you can either say impact defense against it, right? That nothing really happens. So like, say for example, the neg has made the argument like, not spending money now, the F spends $5, that causes poverty because Martin is now totally impoverished and without money to do anything. You could be like, not really,
non-unique.
You could be like, fair enough. And you could be like, poverty is not that bad. And the other response you can make is like, impact turn, poverty is good. Martin being poor teaches him how to better manage his money in the future so he can pull himself up by the bootstraps and become a stronger man as a result of this. So, and then again, same thing with the link turn, right? As we were talking about in the weighing episode, you got to weigh the impact turn versus the impact. Like maybe it does teach Martin to become a better person because he pulls himself up by his bootstraps. But, he also might like actually starve and die as a result of being impoverished. Who knows? So we'll figure that out. Okay. I think that is everything I want to talk about.
Okay. So before we leave, I wanted to talk generally about disadvantages and advantages. So we spent the whole episode talking about advantages and disadvantages in a very abstract sense. So what we did was we kind of went from the bottom up. We talked about the way that you all already understand arguments. And we wanted to give you a sense of how those arguments worked. And we kind of broke them down into concepts, and we gave you the names that those debate concepts have. So when you make an argument, the main purpose of this podcast is to get you to think about arguments in that way so that you know how to respond to them, and so that when you realize you may have to make additional arguments that you weren't already making, typically with uniqueness and stuff like that, maybe impacts. So an advantage and a disadvantage are also terms for policy debate style arguments. Now, we understand that a lot of you are not in positions to introduce those arguments in your debate rounds, either because the circuit kind of frowns on those things. You have a lot of judges that just wouldn't understand if you did that. That's perfectly fine, but you have to realize that every negative utilitarian argument, every negative consequentialist argument is a disadvantage. It just may lack some components it really should have. Disadvantages and advantages, people think of them as policy arguments. And of course they are. There are disadvantages and advantages in policy arguments. But you have to realize that in the case of this policy argument, the reason that they have those names is that that's just how arguments work. And for no other reason. Really what happened was that in policy debate, it got really formalized. But that was not just because. That formalization happened because people knew that you had to make arguments in this way because they didn't make sense otherwise. So even if you never read a disad, which is short for disadvantage, DA is also short for disadvantage. Even if you never read a policy disadvantage in your life and you never read an advantage in your life, just recognize that that is what an argument is. Know that it just has an argument has to be a description of this. You have to have a description of the status quo. Otherwise, you are missing something. So when you make arguments, your debating should be much more rich and developed now that you understand this. Formally writing an advantage and a disadvantage is easy. You already know how to write those things. They're just normal arguments. The only difference is you've taken out some of the parts of those arguments and you're developing them a little more, maybe doing slightly more research than you normally would, etc. But overall, this is a policy style argument, and we, in our podcast, make a conscious decision to not talk about issues that we think would not be applicable to a wide portion of our potential audience. Now, if you all would like us to do more advanced lessons, and we've gotten some questions to do those to our email address, please send us emails at the Argument Clinic Podcast at gmail.com, because we're interested in hearing what are the kinds of things that you all would want. But in general, what we try and do is we try and talk about fundamentals. We try and give people the maximum amount of our audience the thing that they will kind of understand most. So we don't talk about big policy style arguments because for some of the newer debaters or debaters that just never get a chance to debate outside of their like local area, that just is entirely not useful to them. But we fervently believe that understanding how disadvantages and advantages work is important to just understanding how consequences work in debate. And once you understand that, your ability to just have a normal debate with anyone will improve. And those of you who have heard of the quote unquote disad for a long time, we hope that you, as a result of this, have gained a newfound understanding of, in general, what these things are, how you would answer them, as Lauren said, how you would write them yourself, should you so choose. But above all, we just want you to recognize that this is what an argument looks like in a consequentialist sense. You've been making disadvantages and advantages for your entire debate career already. And now you just know the names for the parts. Okay, so anything else before we send off to the end segment, Lawrence?
Nope. Just want to reiterate, even if you never get to use these in your these terms in your local circuit, just knowing what they are matters a lot in responding to arguments, like crafting good arguments, and learning the technical aspects of debate.
Yeah, okay. So as we hinted at the beginning of our podcast, there's going to be no end segment for this week. You'll have to wait for the mini debates for next week. Actually, there are plenty of mini debates in the section that we just recorded earlier. So this next section will take the place of our end segment, and it is a thrilling conversation between myself and two lovely relatives of mine who have enriching debates and opinions for you all to consider. So we will see you all next time. As far as telling people to stay frosty, these kids will certainly do that themselves. Okay, have a good evening, everyone, or whenever you're listening to this. I guess for us it's really late evening, but for you it could be have a good whatever time of day it is, my friends.
So why don't you tell the lovely folks at home what your name is, but only your first name?
I'm
Meredith.
So Meredith and Trevor, is that right?
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, Meredith and Trevor, first I want you to tell us just a little bit about yourself. Just a couple sentences. Say it into this beautiful microphone here. Try and make yourself sound as good as possible. Are you superheroes? Are you doctors? Are you lawyers? Are you firemen? Are you spacemen? You'll eventually tell us all of those things. But before I do that, I'm going to give you each these headphones, and through these headphones, you can listen to my podcast co-host Lawrence from across the country in Oklahoma. You're going to introduce yourself to him. So first thing I'll do is Meredith, I will give you these headphones. So put these on real quick. Introduce yourself to Lawrence. You'll say hi. You should be able to hear him. Lawrence, say hello.
Hi.
I can't hear Lawrence. But
Yeah, I can hear you from there. You can.
That's true. Okay, so introduce yourself to Lawrence, and Lawrence will say some nice things to you back.
I am Meredith.
Hi, Meredith. And there's one more of you there.
Yes.
Yes. So Trevor, would you like to introduce yourself to Lawrence?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Trevor.
Hi, I'm Lawrence, as I just said. So
All right.
Trevor,
So
Meredith.
are you all secret agents working for the government?
No.
Oh no.
No. Are you aliens?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Meredith is an alien.
No.
You've heard it here first. Okay. She's kidding, of course. Not an alien.
Or maybe she can be the Illuminati. Don't know.
Maybe.
No, I'm a panda.
You're a panda. Okay. A
Okay.
panda alien.
A talking panda.
That's awesome. Okay, so why don't you tell the fine folks at home, maybe if you're in school and not a panda alien, maybe what grade you're in and what things you like to do. What are some fun things that you like?
I'm in 5th grade.
This is Trevor.
And I like cars. I like music, especially old music from the 80s and 90s. And I like animals.
Mm-hmm. Do you like cars from the 80s and 90s with music from the 80s and 90s that
Yes.
also has animals in them? Do you like that?
That'd be awesome.
Three
That'd be
combination of
Yes,
things?
yes, yes.
Yeah, look, I haven't ever seen this shirt, but that'd be awesome. Like,
That'd be great. That'd be great. I'm sure you can find it somewhere.
probably.
Okay, and so you are in the 5th grade now. Meredith, what grade are you in?
Second,
You're in 2nd grade now. What are things that you like?
pandas.
Pandas. Do you also like aliens?
No.
Because you must like yourself if you're a panda and an alien.
Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are good. Dinosaurs are good. I love dinosaurs. Who doesn't like dinosaurs? Everyone likes dinosaurs.
He doesn't like dinosaurs.
Hey, no,
Trevor doesn't like dinosaurs.
No, I do. I like them.
What if the dinosaur was driving a car playing 80s music?
That would be amazing.
That would be awesome.
I like cute animals.
Cute animals.
And I also like human milks.
Yeah, that's true.
Like
True.
pandas.
That's true. What about like cockroaches? Do you like cockroaches?
Nah.
They're not a cute animal. Would you
I'm-
consider cockroaches a cute
I'm
animal?
not one of those
I would
creepy
just-
crawler
I would
guys.
I would just be calm.
Okay.
I'm not the one of those creepy crawler dudes who likes bugs.
I hear that. Lawrence, are you a creepy crawly dude that likes bugs?
I am not one of those.
I can't actually hear what you're saying, so
Oh,
that's
I'll give it
okay.
back
No,
to
no,
you.
no, no, no.
Alright.
It's okay. I just
He
want.
said
I
he's
just want.
not. He said he's not.
I just want your answer
He
to
says-
only be heard by Trevor.
He's not.
Okay, okay. So I have assembled some questions for you. I will ask you each. So first question. So this is, so you may not know, I'm a debate coach. So I teach people how to argue with other people.
I love
And so-
arguing, but I always lose.
Well, one day perhaps you will not lose. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask you some really debatey questions. Okay, we're gonna really hit the important topics of our day, like for example the topic hot dogs versus hamburgers. So I want
cheeseburgers. You have to bake it right, and bacon burgers, cheese bacon burgers. You
Okay.
gotta make it
but
right.
I want an argument. Why the cheeseburger over the hot dog?
It's way better
It's way better, but why? Come on.
because the bacon with patty and then cheese and then the thing and then some bread.
Can't
and you got one.
can't put bacon and cheese on a hot dog.
That's
That's
No.
not really.
I guess that is a strong point. Do you have a counterpoint, Meredith? You want to defend the hot dogs here from his
Yes.
insensitive attacks?
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of looks
So what do you like about hot dogs? Why are hot
You can
why?
put almost everything on it.
That's true. A lot of things that you can put on hot dogs, like relish or sauerkraut or all these random things that adults
Ew.
tell me is good, but I don't actually like. Okay, and a lot of things. Okay, so now that we have a strong disagreement here. We've got hot dog and the hamburger camp. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll go on. So how about this? Do you all know Batman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know Spider-Man?
Yeah.
No, you don't know Spider-Man?
Well,
Yeah.
kind of, but I don't know
Kind of.
about him.
Okay, well, maybe Trevor knows a little bit more. So,
Yeah.
Trevor, what do you feel? Batman or Spider-Man is better?
Batman.
Batman.
As much as
Why?
I don't like super as much as other people I know,
Mhm.
people are superior fanatics. I'll go with Batman because he's a $1 billion. He can
He
take
has
on-
$1 billion.
He's
That's
a
true.
he is $1 billion trillionaire. He could take
$1
on
billion trillionaire.
Yeah, he
That's
can
a
take
$1,000
on
billion
Iron Man and Superman because he can do it from kryptonite. He can buy some kryptonite.
Yeah, it's true. I guess money can solve all of your problems eventually. You can
Well,
fund some stuff.
except for ladies.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see. Okay, so what do you feel, Meredith? How do you feel? Do you like Batman too?
I like Spider-Man.
You like Spider-Man. Why do you like Spider-Man?
Because he can just swing webs.
I could just have
He
homing.
can.
I could have homing missiles and I'm a billionaire. It won't cost me that much.
Look, true. But let Meredith talk. Okay, so we've got the spider webs
Yeah.
go around.
And
Just to make sure.
he can I don't know much.
That's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
He swings around. Batman doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily do a lot of swinging. He does a lot of hanging upside down and looking at bad
He
people.
takes against one of the hardest villains who could survive a batarang in his eye, the Joker.
Wow,
And he
that's
laughs the whole time.
true. Wow, it's true.
And is immune to his own gas that laughs until you die.
The Joker is certainly a formidable villain. A good point in favor of Batman. Swinging from webs, good point in favor of Spider-Man.
What good villains does Spider-Man have? Tell me, Meredith. Tell me.
What? Spider-Man has a lot of good villains. Come on.
What makes his strength that can take on the Joker?
I'm not debating you right now. I'm unequipped to debate you. You're just so good at arguing. So we're gonna move on to the next topic.
Well, I always lose for some reason.
Well, you just won, so there you go. Prove you wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next topic is going to be a very weird topic, and you aren't going to know what it means, but it's going to be really funny to our listeners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you two names, and I want you to tell me which name is the best name. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So the first name is Jake Niebel, and the second name is Chris Tice.
I hate the Jake Pauler, so I'm going to go with Jake. Wait, what was the last one? Chris Chillis. I hate him. Yeah. You get out of here. Get out of YouTube. Get out of YouTube. And get out of YouTube. Go back to Vine. Even though it's dead. Go to Vimeo or something.
Okay, that's fair. Meredith, what do you think?
I like Jake because it's just a nice name.
Jake.
Jake
is a nice name. That's true.
It's getting ruined by Jake Paul, so.
Oh no, it's unfortunate.
You should not vote for it anymore.
Okay. So now, good. Some very good points that are now immortalized on the internet. So now, could you take those headphones off and give them to Meredith?
All right.
You know you're gonna hurt Jake Paul.
Oh no.
Dude, I don't care about Jake Paul. He doesn't even care.
So now, so Lawrence, if you wouldn't mind asking them some of these questions.
Okay, so my first question is, what is the best game in the whole wide universe?
I know the best game.
Whoa! It's Meredith's turn. Come on.
I know by Mace.
Wait, she goes first. Best game. Any game.
I don't really know one.
Checkers, chess.
You talking about video games or games?
Any game.
Any games.
You know, there could be a game called Throw the Ball Back and Forth to Trevor. I mean, it's a pretty bad game, but you know, like any game, you know. There could be a game. It's like, how many things can you stack on top of each other? So, for example, I've got this one, and this gives me a score of 2. And for all the listeners at home that can definitely not see this, I'm sure this is really really helpful. But you know, any game. Jumping up and down really slowly.
There you go. Okay.
How about this, Lawrence? Soccer. See, that's a game. Okay. And why do you like soccer?
Cause I'm really hyper and it just gets all my energy out.
Okay.
Oh, true. Good point. Soccer certainly does help you vent excess energy.
Yeah, and
almost the best person on your team. Wow, shots fired. They're all going to hear this and be like, "Oh no,
shots fired!"
There's no way that they would hear this. Okay, so and now, Trevor, what is the best game in your opinion?
It's a hard one. I have to go with 2 games if you can make that.
You got to pick one.
For 2 for different genres. If you're gonna go to my favorite. Sorry, Jake.
Doggy.
Sorry, Jake. What are you doing, Jake?
That was an even more special guest appearance from Jack the Chihuahua, who you will probably never hear from again, fellow listeners. Never. Okay, so favorite game.
From the first person shooter genre, it has to be a Battlefield 1.
Battlefield 1.
It's my
strong
favorite
choice
because I love it. It's better than the World War II. It has way better reloading speeds. It has long loading screens, but they're getting work with that. We're working with that.
Reloading speed, strong decision. How about your second game?
It also has great graphics. Have you seen the graphics? Go on Google now.
You will have to trust me that I have seen them.
Oh, no, for the viewers at home now. For the viewers at home.
Yeah, viewers at home, make sure to have Google Images ready and really just pop in Battlefield 1 and into your search bar. Okay, second game.
And then compare it to Rubbish on the ground, compared to Rebel on the ground from the game in real life.
Okay, we got it. Okay. How about your second game?
For racing, it has to be the Forza Horizon series as a whole. Can that happen, please?
Yeah, I guess.
Have you ever played the Forza Horizon series?
I do not think so. But we're actually going to move on. We're going to have 2 other debate topics, and then we're going to sign off. So this debate topic, okay, this time we're going to enter some real heated, contentious debates of which country is better. So the 2 countries that we have to choose from are Canada or Britain.
Hey,
Canada or Britain.
Hey, you're forgetting.
Gotta pick one.
You're forgetting my favorite I'm actually Hungarian myself. Hungry. I don't care. You give me Hungry.
Canada or Great Britain is unfortunately the topic that we have in front of us.
Oh,
obviously, they're obviously.
Can we add or hungry again?
Look. if you were in a class and someone said, which are better, apples or oranges, and then you were like star fruit, wouldn't get a very good grade on that quiz. So come on, Canada or Great Britain? It's a tough choice. Canada. That's a funny name. Lawrence over here just absolutely hates Canada, don't you, Lawrence?
They're the worst.
Okay.
Canada.
You heard it here first. No Canadians will ever hire you. You know, Lawrence. You are unemployable.
I think Canada's better because they have very patriotic, and unlike Britain, they say this is a pretty bad place. Do not come here, and we will. It's just bad.
Okay.
And Canadians are always nice. Stereotype confirmed. Yes.
All right. Canadians always nice. And now, Meredith,
Yes?
you said you like Canada. Do you like maple syrup?
Yes.
That's another strong argument in favor of Canada, huh? Okay. So now is the last question, and this one is really a contentious issue. So I'm going to give you a topic, and I want you to tell me whether you would affirm that topic or you would negate that topic. And if you affirm the topic, you support it, and if you negate it, you don't. Okay? So I want you to give me affirmative or negative. I'm going to give you a question. So the question is: summer vacation should be abolished and replaced with 2 months of more school.
No.
You should see the look on these kids' faces. They're so horrified. They're so scared. No. All right.
Rip headphones users.
That's true.
Everybody's listening.
Lawrence, you will have some editing to do, my friend. Okay.
Please don't do that.
Oh no. Okay.
You have to take the volume lines down a little bit.
I think Lawrence's eardrums are already destroyed. So that's okay. So why not? I mean, if you had all this school, you could learn so many more things. They could tell you so many more numbers and letters.
That's a good
Just
point.
1 month.
Just 1 month. The Meredith goes for the compromise.
That's a good point, but honestly,
Actually, no, 2 days.
2 days. Okay, that's
but
more
actually
reasonable.
that's a good point. But I never get to classes I actually want to learn about. You know what I want to learn about?
What do you want to learn about?
Spanish.
No. Get out. Get out of this podcast. Let's learn about some history that's actually interesting right now. I would
Like cars.
car history. That
That would
would
actually be
be a
awesome.
very short class. Okay.
Like, hey guys, done.
Be a couple days for sure. So what kind of history
Why
would you choose to learn about?
Why would it be a couple of days? How would it be a couple of days?
Yeah, I too do not know how it would fit in a couple of days. But so just what kind of history would you prefer to learn about that you feel that you are not learning about in school?
Since I'm in 5th grade, I would read either there's 3 ones. Music, because music, honestly, I have the best music. #Rush. You gotta learn it. You gotta like it. No one. You know what Rush is? No?
Yes. Okay. Now,
I love Rush.
all right. Yes. Okay. So so you would like to learn about music in school?
Yes, and what they were liking at the time, and like what say in my day, we thought this was cool.
Mm-hmm. Pop culture history.
Second one would be cars, as I said.
Mm-hmm. And the third one?
We will get into it, but not now. I would like to learn about more of the focus on more of the bigger wars and the like World War II, Vietnam, Korean War One.
Okay, yeah. Eventually, I can guarantee that, and Lawrence over here can guarantee that you will eventually learn about those things in school.
It's very. I like history. I like history a lot, but the boring history like the Constitution just doesn't resonate with me at all.
The Constitution doesn't resonate with Lawrence either. Trust me. Okay, so
it makes sense why it would be interesting because it's how our companies work, but it's not as interesting as the bloody wars and what's happening when when during that time and how much stress it would put on them.
Okay. Well,
should do that one.
thank you so much, Meredith and Trevor. That is all the time that we have. Thank you so much for coming on. You will see that this podcast will come out in a couple days, and you'll have a chance to listen to it, and we'll see just how good Lawrence is for making sure that our listeners headphones don't explode their brains. So, however, eventually, if it does explode their brains, your brains will be exploded when you listen to it. So really, what goes around comes around.
I got a recommendation if we ever got on another podcast. Right here. You can't see our screen right now, but right here.
I did write some other questions. However, some of the questions that we had went longer. So perhaps when you come on again, you'll get a chance to do.
What is your next podcast?
Plus favorite sport.
Some more of these questions. You already said that. That's the thing.
What is your next podcast?
You said soccer. Anyway, that's all the time that we have for now. So when we see you next time, so one thing that I do at the end of every one of my podcasts is at the end of my podcasts, we say a catchphrase. We say "Stay frosty." Except when we do when we say "stay," we really emphasize the A. So what I want you to do is I want you to say both at the same time. I'm going to do a 1, a 2, a 3, and then you all are going to say "Stay frosty." Okay?
And
do you understand?
Another one.
Do you understand? Do you understand?
Yeah.
All right. So 1, 2, 3.
Stay
frosty!
All right. Thank you very much.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.